So there was a woman that was meeting some new friends, and they were an older couple. She'd never met with them before, and they were at dinner, and so she asked the woman, she says, well, what do you do with your time? She said, well, I'm becoming an artist. She's in her 70s. She said, really? She was intrigued. She said, really, you're becoming an artist? She said, yes. I decided 2 years ago that I wanted to do art. And at that time, I couldn't even draw a stick figure. Truly, could not. But she said there was something in me, a passion, a desire, that made me want to draw and to paint. So the woman she was talking to said, well, could you show me some of your work? Do you have anything on your phone? She said, well, I just happened to. She showed her 4 paintings. There were a couple of landscapes, a couple of wildlife, and she said they were absolutely extraordinary. Couldn't believe it. At this point in her life, when she first met the couple, she thought, well, whatever they were doing, they'd been doing for, 50 years maybe. Certainly wouldn't expect someone 70 to say they're becoming an artist. So the woman that was telling the story said that it encouraged her because she'd always wanted to play the piano. So that week she went and signed up and started lessons, found a wonderful teacher. That's how change happens sometimes, isn't it? Today we're going to talk about change. There's slow change, and that's evolutionary change. Sometimes it happens easily, fluidly, it flows. But a lot of us know about other change too, don't we? Those hard changes, the hard pivots. I'm going to talk in a moment about the hard pivots in life. But first, I have another sweet little story about soft change. And it's how a lot of us are moving from one season to another and still doing it while alive. Don't quit. As Tammy said, nothing in the universe is static. Nothing. I remember seeing on, those inspirational things you see on TV. 20 years ago or so, my granddaughter and I were watching Dr. G. Does anybody remember Dr. G and all the she's a doctor and she a pathologist anyway. They were talking about the death of this one man. He'd had a really bad virus, and they didn't know, though, what he died from. But it turned out that he lay static on his sofa with a virus until he actually died. And I remember her saying that, and what I got from it is life is about living. And if you're not living and if you're not moving, then you're static. And of course, there's not going to be any dynamic energy to come in to push you towards something great, is there? If everything around you is stagnant, and like with him, he died. When her take on it was, if he had just gotten up and made himself move, he could have gotten over it. Now, my husband and some others in the room I know something about that, pushing forward even when it hurts. He's had 2 major surgeries this year, one on his shoulder where he tore the rotator cuff and then had knee replacement about a month ago. And that's what the physical therapist told him. He said, it's going to hurt, but if you don't move, you're not ever going to regain the function of that knee or that shoulder or whatever it is. So nothing is static. And thank you for pointing that out, Tammy. We appreciate that. Nothing is static in life. Things do move slowly sometimes, though. Sometimes we find ourselves at the age of 70-something, 74 maybe. Let's take that as an example. And we'll say, how did I get here and where did that white hair come from? My goodness. Well, it came on slowly, didn't it? It didn't. It didn't just appear one day. Most of the things in our lives come on that way. We age, we raise our children, we send them to school, and they break our hearts because we want to keep them with us, but we know that we must send them on. So many things that do challenge us, but as Eric Butterworth said, you grow and then you go. And it may hurt a little bit in the process. I read another story of a woman, she was telling it in, I believe it was Reader's Digest, and it was so touching, it touched my heart. She said she took her young pup to a dog park in Manhattan, and she did this regularly whenever she had the opportunity. If the weather was good enough on a Saturday, she would go. And she just loved watching it because watching the dogs was a lot like watching people. They have the same sort of social constructs that we do. What's acceptable, what's not. The grizzled old guys would be growling at the young ones that were just a little bit too friendly and getting in their face too much. But she said it's really comical if you'll just watch. But there was a man sitting on the bench with her, and he looked up. He was reading something, looked up and yelled for his dog, and he said, "Buddy, Buddy," yelled it really loud, and Buddy didn't come, so it got her attention, and she looked over to see who he was motioning for. And it was an older dog that was just standing there, not with the others, but just standing looking at the group. And so he yelled for him again, and Buddy still didn't come, so he went over to where Buddy was standing at the fence watching the other dogs, and he reached down and petted him. He said, "Come on, Buddy, let's go." And so they went and sat down on the bench. And the woman says, "Oh, is he blind?" And he said, "No, he has dementia. And he doesn't remember where he is anymore. He doesn't remember how to go out and play with the other dogs and doesn't have the energy to do it either." He said, as a matter of fact, in our home, what we first noticed was that he would become disoriented and he didn't know where he was. He was confused. And he laughed. He said, and if he could become confused in a Manhattan apartment, as small as that is, then we knew something was really seriously going on here. So his partner took Buddy to the vet, and they lovingly did all they could to encourage Buddy to have the quality of life that he could. He said, so I bring him here. I bring him here so that he can at least get out and get the little exercise that he can, that he feels like. And then I take him home, and sometimes we sit up late at night because he doesn't sleep well. He said either my partner or myself will sit up with him and watch movies as late as we can because he loves just sitting there and having company and watching movies. So I know we've all known several buddies in our lives, haven't we? We've had several of those situations. Some are with our animals, or some are with our family members. And we have to lovingly accept the change. And I think that we do that with ourselves too. We love our own bodies. We keep ourselves exercised enough to continue growing as long as we can. Our friend Roger, that passed on to the next life back in September, he told us one Sunday during the pandemic that his dog Bella had come to that point in her life too, and that although he'd like to get up and walk briskly, he sat on a bench with Bella because it's all she felt like doing. And he did that in the afternoon sun many, many days before Bella passed on. And it touched my heart that Roger did that. So this is slow, gradual change. And it happens at many times during our lives, doesn't it? And then there's abrupt change. And our friend Sharon here this morning knows all about that. And that's when your partner receives some pretty abrupt and disturbing news. And then before you can hardly blink your eye, they're gone. They're gone. Apollo Ono, I don't know how many of you have heard of him. He's the most decorated Winter Olympian from the U.S. He wrote a book a few years ago called Hard Pivot. Anybody ever read it or know much about him? Hard Pivot, do you? It's an astounding book. And then after you read it, you're amazed that this young man had learned all that in his lifetime, but he did. He goes on to explain what a hard pivot is. A hard pivot in speed skating is when you're hurtling down the straightaway on the ice in a self-propelled sport, and you're reaching the corner where you need to lean over at an impossible angle, carry that turn on one leg, and then whip around the corner in a complete opposite direction without slowing down. As you hurtle down to the next corner, and improperly executed, of course, is painful and it hurts, and sometimes you fall with others, and if that happens, you can either stay down or you can pick yourself back up and continue on the path. He said that while he looked back on his career, when it became time for him to retire, and Olympians retire at a young age, remember, they're usually not at mid-age when we get that gentle urge or nudge that we want to do something different. But he said that he could have regretted all of the times when he went to all these new cities and he hardly saw anything there. He had been nearly every place in the world. And when he really thought about it, he couldn't tell you much about the sights. Yeah, been to Tokyo. He'd seen none of the beauty there. All he had seen, though, was the hard, grueling work that perfected his skill and his life's purpose at that time. And you see, it was all of that that propelled him forward and motivated him to write the book that encouraged people, no matter where you find yourself in life, no matter, take the turns with as much ease and grace as possible, is what he encourages. And he gives a few tips, and I'll tell you about that in just a moment. He said there are just so many times in our lives when we do need to reinvent ourselves. And I think this is as good an example as anyone that I can think of as someone that has honed his physical skill, his balance, all of this, all the young years of his life from the time he was, before he was a teen. And he started competing in his early teens. And so this is what he had done with all of his young life. Now here he is, retiring. What do you do? I know I was reading another Unity minister, Bill Eckhart. He wrote a piece on unity.org, and he was telling about when change comes, and you need at midlife, it's time for a change. And he said that during his lifetime, he was really, really good at knowing when he was complete with his last venture. The first for him had been in his early years. Then he knew when he was complete and it was time to move on. Then he knew when he became a Unity minister and he served at some larger churches, and he said he was quite certain that he was complete. He just didn't know what he was moving on to. And that's what brought the hard pivot for him. I know I'm finished with what's just happened, but I don't know what's to occur. And a lot of us find ourselves at that point in life, and it is a hard pivot. I don't care what age you are or what season in life. But he said what drew him onward to go on with his next piece in life was that he went ahead and resigned because he knew he was complete there. He did not know where the next open door would take him, but he was willing to have faith and to trust. He had faith in that in-between time, the time in the hallway, that we might call it. Mary Mann Morrissey calls it the time in the desert, just don't pitch a tent and stay there. We all know that. But these are some pretty hard pivots. When you leave a place where you're known, you've had a title like he had, you just don't know yet where you're going. And sometimes there's an in-between time. And this is what Apollo Ono talked about too. This was not comfortable. He can write about it now, and he has comfort knowing that there was a book that came out of that. And I think he's had 3 more books now since that time. But the time he didn't. Now listen, he's leaving a career where he's the most decorated Winter Olympian United States has ever had, and all of a sudden tomorrow he's doing nothing. Nothing. That is a pretty hard pivot, isn't it? And you've got to have trust, and you've got to have faith. And to me, he didn't mention this in so many words, but I think you have to have a motivator when you come to those hard pivots. There's got to be a motivator. And it may be peace of mind. It may be passion, like art or something like that you haven't done in your lifetime, but that passion has got you. And it may be finishing something, being complete in your life. But whatever it is, it will spur you on. He encourages, though, daily practices of gratitude, just like I said about going out and just being grateful. All the things, he mentioned how many things we take for granted. Once you start a practice of gratitude, you'll be amazed how many things there are to be grateful for. And it's in that attitude, that energy. It's a dynamic energy, and it will bring more good to you. Give, he said, before he knew what he was going to do when he was in that in-between time. Give. I remember being at home many years ago, and I was quite concerned. I had an elder's care that I was concerned with. It was an elderly aunt, and she had no children, and I was responsible for her care, and I had made some promises to her, and I had made some promises to myself. But she was in South Florida, and I had one particularly challenging decision I needed to make. And I'd been praying about it all day, and I was having a prayer vigil. And I received a phone call, and it's a woman that had come to the church a few times, and she was pretty needy. And she was crying, and she said, "Miss Judy, they've turned off my electricity, and I don't know what I'm going to do." And so I got her details. I got her account number, and Dan took me down to the Mississippi Electric. And I gave them, apparently it happens all the time, I gave them her account number, paid her account up to date, and even put some on it for the following month. And on the way home, there was such a lifting of this burden that I'd been carrying around for my elders' care. And do you know, before the day was over, a benevolent answer had come. And it was one that had not even come to me before. But I cannot overemphasize the need to give. When you feel you're even desperate yourself, or you have depression going on, you don't know where to go, even if you're grieving, whatever. Care for yourself, but find a way to give to someone. Grit and stamina, determination. I've got a dozen stories there, but I won't give them to you right now. One is of a relative of mine that was a great-grandmother, and there was a family meeting because it turned out that a young teenager, the only place he could live and would live was with his great-grandparents, because they had pretty much cared for him since the time he was born. He was having difficulty with his parents, his grandparents, and so the social worker was very opposed to it and said to the woman, who was 80 and her husband was 86, and he was elderly and needed care. She said, "Well, Miss Claire, how long do you think you can care for your great-grandson? You know that you're not getting any younger." And boy, this spurred her on. She said, "No, but I'm going to give you a short answer. I can do it as long as it takes." And she did. He graduated from high school. He went to the Marines. He did 2 tours of duty in Afghanistan. And he's a fine, upstanding young man. And he regularly thanks his great-grandmother and his great-grandfather. Turns out he was a help too, because he was able to help his great-grandfather get to bed at night. He couldn't on his own. Just so many times in our lives we need all of these things. Grit. And when you get to not that the soft turnings are easy, they're not, are they? Just with our fellow buddy, that's not easy. We have some buddies in our own lives. That's not easy either, and it surely tugs at those heartstrings. Gratitude, giving, grit, gearing up, learning what is yours to do. And as Eric Butterworth said, now go and do something. Go and do something. You may still be in the hallway, but figure one way today that you can serve. I'm wishing all of you sweet, soft turns in your life and hardly any hard pivots. Thank you.